So we're talking about fear and the fearlessness that embodies our current day Christian group of folks. There you go. Look at that. There's the title, there's the subtitle. And our last question that we were on before we hovered differently or before we detoured differently was, how do you combat being afraid? And the two discussion points that we've had so far is I don't combat it. I try to ignore it, which was a really neat discussion that Bruce and Gene helped us to kind of clarify, because we really do. There's a significant effort for folks to ignore that they are afraid because they think it'll just kind of go away. We talked about that extensively. Let me throw out a couple of other for you to think about. I try to desensitize myself to the circumstances, the situations, or persons. Does that make sense? I try to desensitize myself to the circumstance, to the situation, or to the people that make me afraid. And these are tools, folks, not necessarily relying on the Holy Spirit. This is kind of the stuff that that we bring to bear to the situation. So if you were to go to a therapist, for instance, and you had the issue of 88888, probably one of the very first therapeutic things that they would do is they would ask you for the permission to be able to bring in a small arachnid. And they would probably bring it in a very controlled situation where it could not possibly be able to get to you. And they would ask you at some point in time during the therapy session if you will view it and if you will talk about your feelings while you view it, perhaps from a distance, and they would perhaps close eventually the distance upon with which you were viewing this arachnid, tiny arachnid, from a safe vantage spot. And ultimately, if the therapy was going to be successful, they would continue to do that until at some point in time, maybe with that small spider, you could put that on your finger for a few moments, a few seconds. I see you. Appreciate that, Sarah, there. Not saying at all that you're going to appreciate or attend this therapy, but that would be potentially what the therapeutic workbook would look like from a secular standpoint. Does that make sense? That's how you desensitize. Is you get people closer to stuff to the point where then they don't really recognize it as something fearful. And if I'm going to flip that on its ear, folks, that's kind of what's going on with the alphabet agenda. If you introduce that kind of stuff to folks at a very young age, then it's never an issue. Because I can radically change the way your kids think, and then the way your kids think is going to be, remember, within a generation, you can turn people on its ear. And so that's kind of what this desensitization is. And that happens with people too. Yes, sir.
I appreciate that explanation because I was going to ask in what way that was going to be different from ignoring it. So that helps me to understand that it is going to be a sort of a facing it, but at the same time, it's going to be kind of baby stepping your way into it. So it's such a way that when you're encountering it in a less controlled environment, you've got some familiarity to it.
Correct. It's not pretending that it doesn't exist. It's knowing that it exists, but recognizing that in small doses, you're still in control of you.
Most of the time, that's true.
Correct. Another component is I feel like it will just go away eventually. I feel like my fear of a thing, it'll just go away eventually. Now, folks, this is kind of true when you're a kid versus when you're adult. There are certain things that when you're a kid, you're kind of afraid of that you're not so afraid of when you're adult. I could almost say the reverse is true. There are probably some things that as a kid that you're not afraid of, and as an adult, perhaps you become afraid of them. But that's not going away. So that doesn't really answer this suggestion here. But there are things in our life that we feel like it'll just go away. Time, a history. If I move away from it, it'll just go away.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one because here I'm thinking, and maybe this is not understanding your comment there correctly. I feel like it'll just go away. I'm like I said, I think you may be right the other direction. as you begin to understand things better, you understand that there's more danger there than what you realized as when you were younger. That's my thought. So I'm not sure. Can you elaborate on that a little more? I'm not sure I understand how one can feel like this fear is going to go away.
Well, sure. There's a size factor when you're a kid that doesn't exist when you become an adult in some regard. So I'm a lot bigger now as an adult, in both ways, girth and height, than I was when I was a kid. And there are some situations and circumstances, in addition to maybe people, that I had a childhood fear of. I don't now.
I, I give you an example that kind of came to my head when you said this, and I think this kind of gets close to why we're even having this entire conversation. Um, if you are intimidated by having someone come and knock on your door, whether it's a salesman or a Jehovah's Witness or somebody like that, and I know I've been kind of set on edge by that in years past. I don't like strangers coming to my door. And you see those two frumpily dressed women walking down your street with little pamphlets in their hands. It can strike fear in the heart. And you know that eventually they're going to leave your neighborhood. They will go away. And same goes for the guy that's out there selling solar power or that's wanting you to get, encyclopedias like in the old days or whatever. They will eventually leave the neighborhood. And so I see this, also connecting into the fact that, well, if I think I should tell somebody about Jesus, eventually they're going to go away and I won't have to do it. Whatever this situationally, it will change. It will go away and I'll be free of this burden is where I was coming from on that, Preston.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, Bruce, because that's really almost a real time situation that talks about that fear, because we almost cower behind that door waiting for the fuller brush of the Electrolux guide. And I'm dating myself on purpose. Those are terms that we don't use anymore. But if you don't like confrontation or saying no to people, then if you hide behind the door and wait until their footsteps lead away, then your fear dissipates because they just go away. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that explanation.
That's why we've got a variety of folks in an interaction as opposed to just a one-way, this is how you're supposed to do it discussion, because that doesn't stick for Sunday education stuff. You need real-world experiences to be able to go, oh, that's what it feels like. That's what it sounds like. Plus, I'll tell you this too. Anytime you start a sentence with, I feel like, already, that's telling you that there's going to be problems, because feelings are relative and they're certainly not objective. So there's already a problem with, I feel like it'll just go away. And the last bullet here is, why do I need to combat it? Maybe I'm supposed to be afraid, like a healthy fear.
Yeah, I kind of went there with regard to that as well, because the old saying is, do I suffer from insanity? No, I actually enjoy it. The idea is, maybe there is a degree to which fear can be instructional, can help you, and I can see where that could be. I mean, it's kind of like if you take a painkiller, okay, and the pain is supposed to be telling you there's something wrong, but you're not experiencing that pain, that thing that's wrong is going to continue to get worse. And so you're not going to be alleviating the issue. I can see where this might be something that you maybe don't want to do because you're thinking that maybe this is something I'm supposed to be afraid of. But when it comes down to sharing Christ, um, what do we have to fear, to be real honest? Somebody gets really mad and shoots us. We're with the Lord. That's like the worst case scenario. Probably the worst case from us is we actually survive it and someone's mad at us. And all of a sudden there's a fracturing of that particular relationship. that's probably the worst thing we can really think of. And then you have to endure that. That's probably the biggest thing. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
It sounds though like your friend Gary would say, "Well, yeah, I should be afraid. I shouldn't be doing that. That's my common sense telling me to stay away."
Common sense is not very common.
Well, the origins of that phrase is one that sometimes gets watered down when we think about it, because it has to do with stratification and class, as opposed to everybody has it in a different way.
Oh, I
But
thought we were talking about Thomas Paine.
no, oh no, not talking about the good old piece of literature there. But we'll talk about the origins of that phrase maybe later as we study this, but we actually have talked about common sense before its origins. But I like this last one a lot because I don't think we're supposed to have an absence of fear. I think we're supposed to recognize when there's fear. But the key is then, what then should we do with it? And we've at least got a wonderful medical professional that's on with us this morning. So when you've got pain, you need to respond to the fact that there's pain. Ignoring the pain doesn't necessarily say the pain's going to go away. But you've got to figure out what the pain is all about and then rally to do what you need to do so that the pain subsides, or that the pain perhaps works for you becoming more healthy, if that's what the pain is all about in terms of its indication.
I like this whole concept on this last point with regard to Sarah's discussion with her friend and the fear of the Lord, and and maybe that needs to be turned a little bit just with regard to her, so that fear, fearful thing to fall into the hands of an angry God, we understand that maybe, and I'm going to have to battle this too, I guess. Maybe we need to fear not getting well done, good and faithful servant. I think that's pretty good too.
That's been certainly a theme, and that was probably one of the themes after I participated in Ruth's memorial service, because that was one of the lines that came about. Well done, good and faithful servant. And my question is, how do we get that? And should we be fearful of not getting that? And I appreciated Sarah having the interaction with her friend to talk about the fear of God, because that's gotten bizarrely turned on its ear. In that, if we really think about it, if we really, really think about it, there was a time in our past when, at least maybe guys, maybe not so much ladies, but guys, you had, if your dad was in your life, you had a fear of your dad. But it wasn't an unhealthy fear unless you were just always acting up and misbehaving. There was a fear that first of all, there was a fear that your dad was awesome. Your dad was really awesome. And you knew your dad loved you, but you also did things so that your dad wasn't displeased with you. Well, we've certainly lost that kind of perspective when it comes to Yahweh God. We don't really care. He doesn't look like he chastises a whole lot, or he comes down and he says, time's up, you didn't get this right. So we just we pretend he doesn't exist.
When it comes to that, I'm going to have to do a little confessing here. When it comes to that, I don't have much in the way of a father sort of image to fall back on and say that I had this fear, because he was not around very much, either father or stepfather. And so there is a degree to which now I'm getting your context as far as eventually goes away, because I mean, the one occasion I can remember as a small kid, I got spanked by my stepfather, and that really smarted. And I just remember that vividly. I don't remember much in the way of another fearfulness with regard to a father. But yeah, as we get older, and larger, that kind of goes away. I get that, but now I'm understanding your perspective better because I don't have, unfortunately, that kind of perspective to be able to live out. When I went for the first time to a Promise Keepers meeting, and theology aside, one of the things they helped us to realize was you're going to be um, following in the example that you've seen as being a man of the house and the father and husband. And when you haven't had that, kind of have to learn it as you go and make it up. And that's where I've been. Is I've not had much that I've been able to see with regularity, except my second stepfather was a godly man. I love him dearly. I was not disciplined by him because I was an adult, but at the same time, I saw how he interacted with my mom. So my point is, I understand better your eventually it'll go away kind of thing because we do have situations where we grow into kind of like Dr. Rick says, we become our parents. And now we're the ones that bring fear and trembling. But at the same time, it's I now understand your perspective better on that.
I appreciate that, Brother Gene, because part of this study is we don't really talk about this enough in the Jesus believing community. We use the words, we certainly use all, we use fear, we use awesome, but we never really take a look how to apply them and what they mean, and then what our perspective should be toward them. And when I hear you talking about your situation, and that's why I presented the way that I do, recognizing that some of us may not have had the dad experience the way that we did, and certainly sometimes that disappears sooner for some of us than others. But there's a time when, doggone it, if you do have that experience, and that, what you said about Promise Keepers, when it was doing its job, that's one of the things that it did, is it instilled that sense of fathership, that sense of greatness and awe that should permeate a family when the dad's presence is there, right? And when I think about the situation that you just talked about, this healthy fear that was an awe. Remember this thing? I used to tell this story a lot about my dad. We used to put together. You guys remember screen houses back in the day? In the summer, you would put together these screens, and then you'd put a roof on top of them, and that's where you get some shade artificially outside. Especially because our generation didn't have video games. You had to go outside all doggone day. And if you wanted some relief from the sun, you'd have to get under a tree, or you'd be able to get in a screen house, which was kind of the chic thing to do. And we put this up every year, this thing. And it was usually kind of my dad putting it up. But one year he allowed me and my 3 high school friends to help him with this. And we were putting the roof on, and the roof had one of these tops where you had to kind of stretch it and then put it over the clip on the top of the roofing. And I think we were all maybe sophomores in high school, pretty good sized dudes, at least in our own minds. And we struggled with pulling this thing on to the roof and clipping it. We couldn't do it. And 3 of us were doing it at a time. And my dad was to the side watching, and he was kind of smirking. And my dad said, "Boys, move out of the way." And he came over and he grabbed the roof, and with one pull, he went, pop, boom. And we backed off and we went, oh my gosh. So when I think about healthy fear and awe, that's my dad's story when I go, because I was an older, I wasn't like a little kid. I went, he just blew me and my friends away. That's the way, in some ways, I try to help folks understand that awe that we should have toward our Heavenly Father, where he should be able to blow us away in the simplicity of how he operates, because he's so far above us, and that when we think we've got a handle on it, he's got a better handle on it.
I like the mixture of the terms you use there. That was fun because he had a handle on that roof. That was pretty cool.
It was cool watching them. I was just transported there in the telling, because it was awesome. Our next question, jumping down, we're talking about combating fear. The next one says, so is there a temporary cure for your fear? Is there a temporary cure for your fear? And if so, what is it, and ho, how do you implement it?
Oh,
But I think
see.
ho's important as well, but I think it's important more the how than the ho. So is there a temporary cure for your fear? And ho, 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 ho. How,
All fixed.
how, that'd be a different question, but maybe we can tackle them both in the approach. So how do you implement it if there's a temporary cure?
The hoe may be some people's solution, brother. You say it.
That's I agree with that. All right, folks, you had these assignments. So you can simply do what Sarah sometimes does. You can read what you wrote. What you got?
There is no temporary cure for mine, Gene, or for Preston. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, there
Okay.
is. It's the calorie. It's the shoe.
The shoe. Okay, that might be a temporary cure, but yeah.
Temporary cure is super.
So
So you,
simply,
so you introduce the arachnid to the bottom of your shoe.
Well,
basically
yes.
make the inside come out.
All right. So since it's so early in the morning, and I'm giving the Pratts a pass on this because they've only got limited sleep. So the rest of you, no excuse. But let me just throw out some things to think about. Temporary cure.
Preston, I would go back to that one in the last one. You just ignore it for a little while, and it's temporarily gone away.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's certainly some of these aren't stuck in the category of the question that was posed. I think sometimes if you think if I don't look at the spot on the wall, if I don't look at the spot on the wall, it won't bother me. If I don't look at the spot on the wall, it won't bother me. You guys remember that when you were a little kid, maybe in the room, and you looked at the wall and there was something on the wall, and it was at night. And so the way that you deal with that is not looking at the thing on the wall, except then you did look at the thing on the wall.
Well, and you know what? When I first read this question, the first thing that came to my mind was exactly that. The temporary cure is this. And that's how I implement it. Just close my eyes to it. Pretend it's not there.
Sure. But the pretending is really not what you consider a cure. You know that you're pretending it's not there. So let me throw out some things that might qualify as cures. Relaxing my breathing. Relaxing my breathing. By the way, you've heard this. You've seen movies where folks they're hyperventilating, and the person who's the more in control party, what do they tell them to do? Control your breathing, relax your breathing. Right. That's one of the things that sometimes helps with escalating fears. Controlling your breathing. Exercise.
I experienced that
Oh, go ahead,
with
Jerry.
my mom.
Yeah.
When my mom was in the
Right.
hospital,
Right.
and they put that blood pressure cuff on you that starts automatically from time to time. She's extremely, and I mean to the extreme, sensitive to that. And
Right.
as soon as that thing would start squeezing, she would start just screaming and hollering like someone was beating her to death.
Right.
And we kept trying to tell her, you need to relax to be able to, and the pain won't be as bad, but she couldn't do that. So I'm like trying to get her to look at me and to breathe in and out and deep. So she definitely had a fear of that thing and hated it
Right.
every time that it went off, and trying to get her to change her outlook on it or change the atmosphere that it caused for her was very difficult for
Right.
that fear. And to me, I know it's hurtful, the squeeze and everything, but it's almost more fear because she forgets each time what's happening. So
Right.
every time it's happening again, it's like it's the first time, and she still doesn't always understand what's happening and why.
Right.
So there was definitely that fear.
It's an excellent point, Sherry, because you reminded me of a condition that is evidently something that's real and diagnose, to our medical person here, white coat syndrome. There are people that they go to take the blood pressure, but it's a doctor, and now I'm afraid, and now the blood pressure is going to go up unnaturally. And so my mother doesn't get her blood pressure taken at the doctor's office. She basically tracks it at home away from all the white coats so that they can get a better reading as to what she is naturally. So I appreciate that. Sometimes you got to take a look at things and go, press on.
And folks, this may feel like it's an exchange that's in about feelings, but it is in some part because churchgoers, Christians, Jesus believers experience this stuff, and sometimes we just kind of gloss it over. Sometimes we respond to it the way that the gentleman that Ellen and I had talked to yesterday respond to it, which is, I don't really want anything to do with that. So I'm not going to deal with that at all. And the not dealing with it is in part what makes us so ineffective in today's world to be able, person by person, to talk about this is not what God intended. Yahweh did not want this to happen. Jesus didn't die for the messiness that is the world right now. But we've got to be willing to at least recognize, oh my gosh, I'm getting hackles, I'm getting afraid, I'm beginning to hyperventilate, but I need to do this. So how do I do this? And that's why we're taking a look at the feelings, the activities that are involved, so that maybe you know how you've been compensating or how you've maybe been avoiding those things that potentially are fearful, and you're just going, nope, not going to deal with that. Now, I'm not telling you that our study is going to be a fear for 888, or for my other favorite Sarah moment, Bridges. It ain't going to be it's not going to be a cure-all for that. But maybe what it'll do is it will put a different tool in your toolbox other than my hammer, which is a pretty good doggone tool, by the way. That's why they wrote a song about it, If I Had a Hammer. Exercise.
Especially if you're Thor.
What's that, Jerry?
Especially if you're Thor.
Thank you very much. Enough said. Exercising. Okay, I don't have pushback on that, so that means maybe some of you guys understand the physiological ramifications of exercising. You get endorphins released. Sometimes you get the happy pills chemically going, and those outweigh the anxiety pills in your body.
Okay, I didn't see that at all. I
What'd you
was
say?
thinking what we've been talking about for months now is we can overcome the fear of sharing Christ by exercising that muscle so that we're able to share Christ. I didn't see anything with endorphins there.
This is temporary cure. And this is less Jesus oriented. This is more secular. This is somebody asked you what's your temporary cure for your fear? Sometimes it's exercising. So not necessarily going and sharing Jesus without fear. We haven't gotten there yet. We're talking about, so if we had regular people on our broadcast today, they'd be able to help with this question because this would make sense. Exercising for that endorphins release, that creates a positive chemical presentation in your bloodstream that then allows you to kind of have a neat adrenaline rush that says, I can conquer everything. Meditation. Oh, go ahead, Gene.
I'm just saying, oh.
Okay, so sure. So less the Jesus orientation on these, especially because we're talking about a temporary cure, because you're actually talking about a more permanent cure.
Okay.
Next bullet, meditation. This is a big one in today's world. Surprisingly, a lot of folks who say they're Christians do this. Or mediation, sorry.
Oh,
I think it should. I think it was meditation.
okay, so as that's being corrected, I recall a time when Dr. Wimp talked about the importance of meditation from a Christian perspective. I'm not talking about Eastern, you know, Dalai Lama or whatever, Hare Krishna meditation kind of thing, like the Beatles kind of helped invade our country back in the 60s. Um, I'm he'd be riding down the road and somebody look at him and he had tears coming down his face and someone would say, "What are you doing?" He said, "Meditating." And what he's meditating on is he's dwelling on the cross. He's dwelling on what Jesus had done for him. So I think we need to probably be a little more specific with this particular bullet point.
Well, again, if we're talking about a temporary cure and we're talking about the secular answers that folks bring to the table, this is one your therapist recommends. Once you go to the therapist, he's going to recommend some meditation. And that meditation may be reciting some healthy affirmations, maybe reading a positive, not a devotional, but one of those kind of positive thinking. I think, in fact, that's coming up next. Because these are temporary cures that people glom onto to say, this is going to work for me. There you go, positive thinking. Positive thinking. This is why folks a lot of times attend seminars, because it injects them, it instills them with an ability to be positive thinkers. When they feel fear or anxiety or that kind of thing coming on, they then begin to engage in positive thinking. I can handle this. I can do this. Some of this is about postmodernism.
Yeah, I'm beginning to feel like you and I have very different histories.
You know what, Preston? This is right down the path when we used to be involved in Amway. This was how you got people who were, whatever their background was. It wasn't getting people to buy into a multi-level business, and it was a steady diet of getting you to read positive mental attitude books, The Power of Positive Thinking, Think and Grow Rich, As a Man Thinketh.
Right.
And I could go on and on and on with that. How to win friends and influence people. And just to really reprogram your mind. I think there's some value to it, actually. If you've got, as Zig Ziglar would say, if you're kind of focused on stinking thinking, see, I could just this stuff's just coming right off,
Right.
It's a reconditioning. But and then they would also one of the parts of the program is that you needed to have a steady diet of listening to people who had done it, who had been successful at doing that, and listening to their story of how they got there and how they became successful and how they were as much of a loser as you were. And that was kind of it. I take nothing away from that. Even though you're saying all this stuff, some of this stuff is good. It's just, it maybe isn't where it's not the best, right? That's very cliche. Don't give up the best for the good. That's the whole idea.
Yeah.
There's nothing inherently wrong with it. It just may not be the best methodology, but it does work.
Yeah.
So, dumb question. And again, this is perhaps the difference between our backgrounds. Positive thinking, possibility thinking, Bob Schuller, L. Ron Hubbard. Is there a correlation there?
Not with some of those names. This is why Oprah's a billionaire. This is what Oprah espouses. All of this stuff.
Okay.
Where the danger comes, and it's what I experienced and why some people thought Amway was a cult, is that oftentimes what people would do, and this is kind of a scary little area, is people would sometimes, more often than not, well-meaning people would use biblical principles for secular purposes. And now you have trod into some of the prosperity gospel people and things like that, where they quote unquote use God for their purposes. And so it gets a little scary, and no, it gets a lot scary actually, because now people have distorted the gospel. But it starts from I think an honorable place, but then they misuse They misuse what God has given for man's purposes.
Also, this temporary cure component, Gene, you'll see, and I like what Bruce brought into the discussion, is that, yeah, these are not necessarily inherently bad things, but especially ultimately where we're going to go, they're a temporary cure for the fear that we have that is underlying in terms of why, if we're now putting on our Jesus hat, why we can't share Jesus without fear, why we're not contagious Christians, why we don't have Jesus encounters, because we're doing these things, and this kind of says, well, I can only do so much of this. I can only relax so much. I can only exercise so much. I can only meditate or mediate or medicate so much. I can only have so much positive thinking. And some of the others you'll see, there's a limit to how much you can do with these things that make them temporary cures.
I understand. Thank you. Pardon my denseness.
No, not at all. But that's why we do this. And thank you, by the way, because sometimes you asking these questions, that highlights things that other people would want to ask. They just didn't know that they should, or they were fearful of asking. So, talking it out. I know this is one I like to engage in. If there's something that I think that I'm apprehensive about, if I talk to someone that I think is of like mind or that has been further than I am, talking it out sometimes works as a temporary cure.
That sounds like what we're doing.
Yeah, and that's why. By itself, it's not a bad thing. But there's a limit to how much talking it out is going to have you jump into the deep end of the pool.
Okay. I'm just saying.
Dig it. Reading. Right? Bruce mentioned that, is when you're reading Dale Carnegie, when you're reading Zig Ziglar, when you're reading these self-help books of these wonderfully successful barons, that helps to get you through the hump that you're experiencing. But after a while, the reading may feel like you're oversaturated. I can't handle one more novel about someone who's way more successful than I am, someone who's way more together than I am. After a while, it begins to feel like it's insulting. I've got my level.
The problem is that you end up reading instead of doing. That's the issue. I've experienced that in doing real estate investing. Is that there's an educational group I'm a part of, and you'll see people that say, "Well, I've been doing a ton of education," and people call them on it and say, "Well, when are you going to go do the work, man?" So you can feel, and I think that's a lot of what you're showing here, is we feel productive, but we're not doing the thing. Oh.
Yeah, I could stop right there, because that's right about where we all live as churchgoers, is that we feel productive. I'm doing the work, I'm doing the reading. When are you going to start doing? And this stuff makes us feel like we're busy. I'm doing what it takes to accomplish what? Writing. Sometimes there's a catharsis that happens when you put your thoughts onto paper and you can see them. It's nice that you're writing, but what are you doing? Writing in my journal. Watching TV is a temporary cure for my fear. Playing games. And I like this last one, focusing on something else. That's probably one we engage in the most. It's not a fear that's going to really take me out of the playground, but it's enough that it's going to take me off my game. So if I just focus on something else as a distraction, well, don't need to worry about that right now. Not so much. And if you then, Brother Gene, if we are then grand enough to take these and apply these in a Christian sensibility, I would tell you that this is probably what Christians engage in during the day when potentially they have an opportunity to just talk about Jesus and dealing with the fear of why we don't.
These last three seem to sound like the ignoring it.
You know,
The previous set.
sure, and they may seem like ignoring it. I think it's really refocusing. The fact that we walk around with our entire life on these things, we are permanently distracted now in a way that the adversary has got to be applauding every single couple of seconds. I got too much to do. I'm too busy. I need to catch up. I'm in the middle of my game here.
It's kind of funny that you hit on a couple of these things because when it comes to relaxing, to be real honest, I like watching TV. I like watching movies, and I'm right there. This is a relaxing thing,
Yep.
and I will do that even on my tablet. When Kathy decompresses, telling tales out of school, she will play some of these games on her phone tablet, and games that I cannot understand or get into, except every once in a while I'll be looking over her shoulder and watch her find stuff in the room or whatever. And so I can see where that can be helpful with as far as the decompression of the day kind of thing. And watching television at night helps me get sleepy to to go to sleep. She has the same thing with playing games, helps her get drowsy so she can go to sleep. So this may not be anything to do with the fear that we're talking about, but I do see us making use of these sorts of mechanisms for other things.
Be aware that this list may not be one that you're personally familiar with. And it's not exhaustive by any stretch. However, they're major and big categories for folks to recognize this is what people in today's world do. Maybe these, the second to the last two, the watching TV and playing games, those aren't those that our generation uses for dealing with fear. But playing games and watching TV, because TV is portable now in a way it never was before, that's accessible to a whole generation that may not use it the way that we used to use it as just simple diversion.
And I don't think it's original, and you might have even brought it up at some point in the past, but I know for me, it's real easy when I walk into a place that I've got to wait to all of a sudden, just right then, I got to check my voicemail or check my email or see who's posted something on my page or some other such thing like that. I've got to do that then.
Yep.
That's absolute. And I know that one of the things that I believe it's through this continual conversation, as well as just the Lord speaking to me, is like, stop making that the reflex movement. When you walk in someplace and you know you've got to wait, don't immediately think, I've got to go check all this stuff on my phone. It'll still be there in 10 minutes, right? And because it is, it really does fall into this category of focusing on something else so that I don't have to deal with dealing with people. But instead saying, okay, I'm going to keep that in the holster and try to make eye contact with somebody or whatever. Because that's not my favorite thing. I mean, it's not about witnessing or any of that stuff. It's just bugging somebody while they're standing in front of me in a line. That's my fear. And it's stupid because I've never had anybody turn on and say, shut up, leave me alone. Nobody's ever done that. But so when you say that, that totally strikes a responsive chord for me, because it's just really easy. And I see that in our world today, right? You're standing especially if you're with people under 30, everybody's standing around, looking like cattle. Everybody.
I think that in some ways the mechanism has just changed. They're not going to turn around and say, shut up. They might put their earbuds in, like Preston was indicating. But there's somewhere in New York City, there is a sculpture of people standing in line, and instead of having their tablets or their phones, what do they have? In the sculpture, newspaper, magazine, mostly newspapers. And there's a special way you fold it in New York so that you can take up a lot less space on the subway, that kind of thing. So once we have a different mechanism. It's certainly not up to date as what we have today. It happens, we see it these days. But yeah, there's a different kind of mechanism there. But yeah, I'm with you, Bruce. I'm because of my, and I'm not quite to Steve's level, but because of my timidity, I'm not interested in catching somebody's eye or engaging conversation.
I think one other way we're kind of forgetting about how people have a temporary cure for fear is self-medication.
Yeah.
Different ways you can do that.
You're going to have to elaborate on that. Is that like drinking a glass of
Alcohol,
courage?
drugs, whatever makes the pain go away.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Sure.
Just want to make sure.
And Jerry's right on this, is that certainly there are the recreational ones that he just mentioned, which are, alcohol and marijuana and then some of the other stuff. But then, in the old days, I'm talking about the 80s and 90s, depending on what you told your doctor, you could get a prescription that could help you to do some of that.
That's the value.
Prozac was a very, very big one that alleviates people's anxieties for whatever reasons, but it didn't eliminate them. It was a temporary fix, because ultimately, at some point in time, your body kind of develops a tolerance to medication, and unless you figure out what the real cure is, you're increasing people's dosage to the point where then you're getting side effects and unwanted effects. We're not nixing medication, not saying that's a bad thing, but what we are saying is, like Jerry said, is one of the temporary cures is, doctor, I really have a tough time when anytime I have to drive to work in this traffic. What can you do for me?
What is it now? They've got a medical condition called unspecified anxiety disorder. I mean,
yes.
Basically, it means people are stressed out. So
right.
Let me take some kind of something with an X in it, and just going to take the edge off for me.
Correct.
So I can deal with the day. Jerry's right about that.
Right. And everything has a label. Everything, my big joke, and like Pastor Bruce just mentioned, there are so many more official disorders now that have labels that never existed when we were significantly younger. And my big joke, of which now is less a joke because there's more weirder ones, almost like the one that Bruce was referring to. Restless leg syndrome did not exist when we were kids. And restless leg syndrome, you've heard me, is infinitely fixable. And it was fixable by one of your parents, typically your mom. And your mom would fix it by hitting your leg and saying, "Stop that." And all of a sudden, miraculously, you were cured.
That's Ernest Ainsley, healed.
It had less of a divine intervention. It had more of a parental intervention. And then that bad boy would just dry up.
Well, and to be perfectly honest, I think there's what you're calling restless leg syndrome is not really the same thing as what my mother-in-law experiences. It's completely different, to be real honest. What you're talking about is a nervous energy that mom seems to help us to calm down. I understand that. But there are some folks that do actually experience an issue where there's a tingling that smacking it may not help.
Well, remember, we're medicating kids now for conditions that we didn't medicate them for 50 years ago.
Well, and oftentimes that medication for Adderall or whatever, that may be keeping that kid out of jail. Be real honest, because
and there are those cases where that makes sense, but just making sure that Ritalin and Adderall are part of a kid's developmental regimen is not necessarily the best way to raise your kid. So
agreed.
In those rare instances where that works because there's a chemical imbalance, I'm all for that. but it's real easy for us to come up with an educational label for the kid, and then that label leads to a prescription, and that prescription is what that kid has during the developmental times in their lives, and then they grow up, maybe not doing so much wacky, but then as an adult, they don't adjust well. And that's extra and actually not even part of the lesson. But look at that. You get
Free of charge.
information too. So, folks, we're at the end of our time today, and please be aware. Jesus encounters are. I appreciate Sarah sometimes letting me know during the week this is happening. Certainly, I get those from Ellen because we're close enough where I get that stuff happening. Or Pastor Bruce will tell me something that's neat during the course of the week. So they should be ongoing. Sunday's just our forum when we gather to be able to talk about them. But the as you going should be as you go. So hopefully you're as you going several times during the course of the week, not just once and going, what can I bring back? So you can share those on our Slack line. You can share those interpersonally, as well as saving them up for Sunday. Because sometimes, what Sarah does, and I love what she does, is she'll get me goosed because something will happen on Tuesday, and it's just delightful and delicious. And then so I'm getting revved up for Sunday because that's when Sarah gets to tell it. So you don't have to wait, and you don't have to, pretend that they just need to happen once a week, right? So we're going to start in next week with a little bit of a similar question about, is there a permanent cure in terms of a secular cure? Is there a permanent cure for your fear? And if so, what is it and how do you implement it? So we just talked about temporary cures. What's the permanent cure? And from a secular standpoint, so we're not talking about the overarching theme of what our fear discussion is about. How do you deal with this on a permanent basis? And then what is it? That's what we want you ready to come talk about next Sunday. So I'm done there. Comments, thoughts, challenges, craziness. What do we need to hear before we discontinue?
Who chose that graphic? Oh, okay. I thought we were picking on her. She's just really owning up to it now.
He's in charge of this stuff. That's what's hilarious. She can make us look awful as we're doing this by just putting up. We just talked about the hoe being a temporary cure a couple moments ago. That was 888 in charge of that. By the way, I followed up. I told you I was going to reach out to good old 888, nickname 888. Her name is really Sarah. But I sent her some pictures of a very special bridge so that she can consider if Thelma and Louising makes sense in that particular instance. So Jerry had asked me about it. It's the swing bridge that is in Cherry Grove, the swing bridge. So if you're familiar with the concept of a swing bridge, it's one of those that allows ships to pass beneath it by opening up.
It's a drawbridge, right?
The drawbridges typically do this. Swing bridge does this. So it is. It actually
it pivots. It pivots on a pedestal, just opens up.
Right. So it said right. So it winds up so that the bridge part is perpendicular to the road. So instead of it being this way, it winds up being this way.
The intercoastal waterway is full of them.
Yes.
But are you on the part that swings open?
No. Not unless you make a big mistake.
You shouldn't be.
There should be that happening so folks don't get into that.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure because on a drawbridge you can't actually be on the piece that's going up. So just was curious.
And that's
you
why I
ask
said
them,
you the
Sarah,
bridge.
maybe they let you go out on the swingy part. That'd get you over your fear.
Either that or I would die trying, literally.
Well, there's another bridge that has nothing to do with driving, though. I'm thinking of some of the bridges they put in movies where a well-placed machete brings the entire thing down because it's a walking bridge and the chasm beneath and all that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how that plays into Sarah's driving issue.
You don't usually drive over those Indiana Jones bridges that you can take out with a machete. But this one, the very question that Sarah asked is why this remains funny on my mind. Are you on the part when it's actually swinging out or lifting? That question in and of itself is enough to see Sarah contemplating, so am I stuck in the middle of the bridge when it's swinging out? Because that's what will make you drive off.
It's
Okay,
a
so
valid question.
Well,
It's
that could be a
valid
pivotal
question.
moment in your life.
Oh, okay.
Steve's over here telling me it just winds up and then slings you across. So this is what I have to deal with.
Home's the place they always have to take you in when there's no place to go, says paraphrased Robert Frost. So they love you, but at the same time, they tolerate you.